The sound of barking echoed down the clean, tiled halls of the Naples animal shelter. Rows of metal kennels lined the softly lit corridor, each one housing a dog. Some gazed out with hopeful eyes and wagging tails, while others lay quietly in the corners of their small enclosures, their spirits worn thin. It was late in the afternoon, just after closing time, and the air carried a somber weight of finality. In a small kennel at the far end of the shelter sat two dogs, their muzzles tinged gray with age, their fur patchy and thin, their bodies bearing the undeniable toll of time. Max, a sturdy German shepherd mixed with a weathered coat of black and tan fur, rested protectively beside Lucy, a smaller golden-colored retriever mix with tired, gentle eyes. The two had been at the shelter for over 2 years, a long stretch in a place where younger, sprightlier dogs were adopted quickly. They had been found separately as strays in the chaotic aftermath of Hurricane Lan in late 2022. Max was discovered wandering the flooded outskirts of Naples near a storm-ravaged neighborhood, his fur matted with mud. Lucy was spotted trembling and alone near a debris-strewn stretch of Enrayer 75, abandoned amidst the wreckage. Despite coming from different places, something about their mutual loneliness and weariness had drawn them together. Over time, they had become inseparable. They ate side by side, curled up together to sleep, and leaned on each other for comfort, their quiet bond a lifeline in the uncertainty of shelter life. But today was different. Today was their last day. Max and Lucy had been deemed unadoptable due to their age and declining health. The shelter was at capacity, and as always, difficult decisions had to be made. The two old dogs had been on the list for weeks. Their euthanasia had been delayed as long as possible in the hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would come in and adopt them both. But no one had. With Max plagued by arthritis so crippling that he often staggered on unsteady legs, and Lucy battling a worsening heart condition that left her wheezing with every breath, the decision had been finalized. Dr. Clara, the lead veterinarian at the Naples Animal Shelter, trudged down the tiled corridor with a sinking heart. The tablet in her hand, displaying their charts, felt like an anchor pulling her down. Over the years, she had learned how to compartmentalize, how to keep herself from being overwhelmed by the endless cycle of hope and heartbreak that defines shelter work. But something about Max and Lucy made this time harder than usual. She had watched them age together over the past 2+ years since their arrival in late 2022. She'd seen them nuzzle each other at dawn, their gentle paw taps a silent reassurance of, "We've made it another day." She'd noticed Max drape himself beside Lucy on her weaker days, his sturdy bulk a protective cocoon around her frail form. Dr. Clara wasn't alone in her affection. The entire Naples staff had grown attached to the duo, often slipping them extra treats or lingering by their kennel. But the reality of shelter life meant that resources were limited and difficult decisions had to be made. Younger, healthier dogs were more adoptable, and Max and Lucy's time had run out. Before continuing the story, we are on a journey to reach 1,000 subscribers, and your support means the world to us. Please like, share, and subscribe to be a part of this milestone. As she neared their kennel, Dr. Clara felt a sharp twist of guilt coil in her stomach. She flicked her eyes to the tablet one last time, her fingers trembling slightly as she tried to steel herself. She loathed this duty, though she knew it was a mercy compared to letting their suffering drag on. Still, the weight of finality pressed down like a storm cloud. Dr. Clara opened the door to the kennel and stepped inside. Max and Lucy were huddled together as they often were, their heads resting on each other in a pose that exuded both comfort and resignation. But something felt off this time. Dr. Clara stopped in her tracks, her breath hitching. Max had draped both his front paws over Lucy in a tender, unmistakable embrace. His broad frame enveloped her tightly, while Lucy rested her head against his chest, her eyes shut in a serene stillness. This wasn't their usual close-knit sprawl. It was something more, a heartfelt hug, the kind you'd witness between two souls parting ways. It seemed as if they sensed the end approaching, as if they were holding each other up through their final moments. Dr. Clara blinked rapidly, her throat tightening. She had worked with animals her entire life, but she had never seen anything like this. The act was so intentional, so achingly human in its warmth, that a chill rippled through her. She sank to her knees beside them, tears brimming in her eyes. Max cracked open one weary brown eye and met her gaze. There was a calm resignation there, but beneath it, a spark of recognition, of knowing. He understood. They both did. A rush of emotion crashed over Dr. Clara. She couldn't go through with it, not now. An instinct screamed at her to pause, to cling to this moment a bit longer. "Jess," she called, her voice quivering as she rose to her feet. Jess, the shelter assistant, was scrubbing kennels at the far end of the corridor. She glanced up, brow creased with concern. "Everything okay, doctor?" "Clara?" she asked, dropping her sponge and hurrying over. "Get me the scanner, doctor." Clara urged, her tone sharp with urgency. "I need to check their chips again." Jess frowned, puzzled. "We've scanned them a dozen times already. Just strays, no owners, no records." "I know," Dr. Clara said, her voice thick as she swallowed hard. "But something's wrong. I can feel it. I need to be sure." Jess gave a small nod, retrieving the handheld microchip scanner from a cluttered shelf nearby. She crouched beside Max first, pressing the device to his neck. It beeped, and the screen lit up with familiar data. Max, a stray, no known owner, found in a flooded Naples neighborhood, October 2022. Nothing new there. Jess shifted to Lucy, pressing the scanner against her neck. The device chirped, and the usual data flickered onto the screen. Lucy, a stray, no owner, found near the Gulf Coast, October 2022. But just as Jess started to lift the scanner away, an odd glitch occurred. It beeped again, Sclera this time, and a fresh line of text scrolled across the display. Jess's jaw dropped as she gaped at the screen. "Doctor! Clara, look at this," she murmured, her voice unsteady as she thrust the scanner toward her. Dr. Clara grabbed the device, her pulse racing. She stared at the glowing screen, her breath snagging as she read. "Lucy registered to the Johnson family, Naples, Florida." "What?" Dr. Clara breathed, her thoughts spinning. This didn't add up. Lucy had been listed as a stray for years. How could she belong to a family? Jess, equally floored, stammered, "No way! She's been here over 2 years. How could she?" Before they could unravel the shock, Jess swung the scanner back to Max's neck. It blared once more, and a new entry flared up. Max registered to the Johnson family. Naples, Florida. Dr. Clara's mind staggered. Both dogs tied to the same family? How had this slipped through unnoticed? How had they languished at Naples Animal Shelter for over 2 years, their past buried? "We need to track down this family," Jess said, her voice a hushed tremble. "There's an explanation somewhere." Dr. Clara nodded, still dazed. "Find me any records on the Johnsons in Naples. We need answers now." The next few hours turned the shelter into a whirlwind. Dr. Clara and Jess dove into action, dialing local authorities, sifting through databases, and piecing together the dog's lost story. As they probed deeper, a poignant tale began to emerge. Max and Lucy had once been cherished members of the Johnson family, living a peaceful life in their Naples home by the coast. They were Emily Johnson's constant companions, playmates who chased waves on the beach, guarded her naps under the palm trees, and filled the house with joy. The two were inseparable, their bond forged through years of shared routines and unspoken loyalty. But everything changed on September 28, 2022, when Hurricane Ian tore through their world. The storm's ferocious winds and surging floodwaters shattered the Johnson home, sweeping Max and Lucy away in the chaos as Emily's parents fought to save her. They were presumed lost forever amid the wreckage. For over 2 years they were forgotten, their fate unknown to the little girl who'd loved them. Against all odds, Max and Lucy had survived the deluge, clinging to debris, scavenging for scraps, until they were picked up as strays in the storm's aftermath. They ended up at the animal shelter, a bustling yet underfunded shelter where they lingered for over 2 years, their past buried beneath the label of unclaimed. By the time Dr. Clara and Jess tracked down Emily through local records and disaster survivor registries, Word of their discovery had rippled through the Naples community. Within hours, plans were set for Max and Lucy to reunite with Emily, now 16, who'd been living with her aunt since the storm. The next morning, Emily arrived at the Naples Animal Shelter, her eyes wide with disbelief. Dr. Clara stood by the kennel, watching as Max and Lucy were carefully released, hobbling side by side as always. The dogs turned to her, their gazes soft with the same quiet trust they'd shown the day before. "They're survivors," Emily said, her voice breaking as she knelt to touch them, marveling at the two old dogs before her. And they never gave up on each other. As Dr. Clara watched Max and Lucy leave the shelter with Emily, a deep wave of peace settled over her. They had teetered on the brink of the end, only to be pulled back at the final hour. Their unbreakable bond had carried them through the bleakest days. Max and Lucy's departure from the animal shelter felt like a quiet miracle. Dr. Clara stood rooted in place, her gaze locked on the pair as they shuffled out together through the shelter's glass doors. Emily Johnson, the 16-year-old who'd come to reclaim them, stood beside them, a slender girl with a storm-weathered resilience in her eyes, become gentler because of disbelief when meeting old friends again. "I thought I'd lost them forever," Emily said, her voice rough with unshed tears, yet laced with wonder. "The way they stuck together, it's like they knew I'd come back someday." Dr. Clara nodded, her chest tight with emotion. "I didn't realize how special they were," she admitted, still processing the gravity of everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. "They were just two worn-out strays to me. I had no idea they carried a story, or that they'd survived so much." "They've always been fighters," Emily replied, brushing a gentle hand over Max's head as she crouched to check Lucy's shaky legs. "And now they're coming home with me." As she spoke, the dogs seemed to sense something had shifted. Lucy's clouded eyes lifted to Emily, and she offered a faint, hopeful twitch of her tail, as if catching a whiff of a long-lost memory in her presence. Max, ever the steadfast sentinel, pressed close to Lucy's side, his aging bulk a quiet shield. Dr. Clara's throat thickened as she watched them. Over 2 years, more than 2 long, uncertain years in this shelter, waiting, enduring, neither of them aware their past was still out there searching. She'd nearly ended their lives. Now they were stepping into a new dawn, a rare gift so few shelter dogs ever received. Emily straightened up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "They're coming home with me," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the tremor of emotion beneath it. "I've got a quiet place now, a little house with a yard near the coast. They'll have vet care, good food, and all the love they've been missing." She looked down at the dogs, her eyes shining with a mix of emotion and determination. "They've been through so much, things I can't even imagine. They deserve to rest with me where they belong." Dr. Clara glanced at Jess, who stood nearby. Jess had been nearly silent since they'd uncovered Max and Lucy's past, the day's events overwhelming even her seasoned heart. Dr. Clara caught the glisten of tears in her assistant's eyes as they both absorbed the moment unfolding before them. "I can't wrap my head around it," Jess murmured, her voice heavy with feeling. "That hug, Dr. Clara. They were ready to let go, weren't they? They thought it was over." Dr. Clara nodded, her own voice a faint thread. "Yes, they knew." But as she watched the dogs hobble off with Emily, a deeper truth settled in. It wasn't just a farewell. They'd been shielding each other, just as they had through the terror of the storm and the lonely years that followed. That bond, that silent, enduring tie, had carried them through the floodwaters and the shelter's uncertainty. As Emily led Max and Lucy to her aunt's car, something happened that took Dr. Clara by surprise. Max, usually reserved and steady, paused and swiveled his head back toward her. His warm brown eyes, etched with age and resilience, locked onto hers for a fleeting, poignant second. There was no trace of sorrow or fear, only a quiet gratitude, as if he were whispering, "Thank you for finding us, for giving us back to her." Lucy, trailing beside him, hesitated too, her faded golden coat catching the soft glow of the evening sun. She dipped her head slightly, a subtle, graceful acknowledgement, before stepping forward to join Max in the truck. Dr. Clara stood frozen as the vehicle pulled away, her heart a tangle of weight and warmth. She had come so close to losing them, to letting them fade into silence, But now, defying every odd, they had a tomorrow. They had each other. And as she watched them vanish down the palm-lined street, a certainty bloomed within her. They had always been destined for something more. Weeks slipped by, and Max and Lucy flourished in their new home. Dr. Clara received updates from Emily via text, each message brimming with brighter news. Emily's modest house near the Naples coast was a haven of tranquility, a world away from the clamor of the shelter and the storm's fury. The property boasted a fenced yard with soft grass, a shady porch swing, and a shallow water dish where the dogs could splash on humid afternoons. Max had started a regimen of arthritis medication, and though his steps remained slow, the treatment eased his stiffness enough to roam the yard. Lucy, under the care of a local vet Emily trusted, showed signs of improvement in her heart condition, her breaths growing steadier. They spent their days basking in the sun or napping together on the porch, as they always had. But now they had room to stretch, a home to claim, and the calm they'd earned. Neighbor Eleanor Carter was also surprised to see the two dogs, a wiry woman in her late 60s with a warm, weathered face and a gentle laugh. She'd lived next door to the Johnsons before hurricane, often tossing treats over the fence and watching Emily play with Max and Lucy in the yard. When she stepped into Emily's backyard, her pace slowed, her breath catching as she spotted the two dogs dozing beneath a sprawling oak. Her eyes fixed on Max and Lucy, grayer and slower now, as they stirred at the crunch of footsteps on the grass. Max roused first, his ears twitched, and for a beat, his frame stiffened. He hauled himself up, joints popping with the strain, but there was a flicker in his stance, a hint of memory stirring. Lucy followed, tilting her head, her faded brown eyes squinting as if piecing together the familiar shape approaching. Then, like a spark catching flame, her tail gave a tentative wag, hesitant at first, then quickening as recognition dawned. Mrs. Carter knelt down, her fingers shaky as she reached out. "Max, Lucy," she murmured, her voice soft and breaking with feeling. Max edged forward, his eyes locked on her. And then, in a flash, something remarkable unfolded. His demeanor shifted, his tail swung, and with a sudden surge no one anticipated from his weary frame, he lumbered toward her, stumbling slightly, yet resolute. Lucy trailed right behind, her tail whipping so fiercely it rocked her frail body. She let out a quiet, eager yip, nudging her nose into Mrs. Carter's hand. Tears welled in Mrs. Carter's eyes as she pulled them close, her arms encircling them gently. "I never thought I'd see you again," she whispered, her voice splintering with emotion. "I thought you were lost to the storm." Max and Lucy hadn't merely endured. They had been holding on, holding out for this moment, for someone who'd once lit up their days with Emily, and now they were connected again, a piece of their old life restored. In the weeks that followed, Max and Lucy settled into their days with Emily, with Mrs. Carter dropping by often. She'd bring them along for short strolls around the yard, toss a softball for them to nudge under the oak's shadow, and sit with them by the water dish where they'd dip their paws on warm days. The thread tying them to her hadn't frayed through the years apart, and now in the gentle dusk of their lives, they could finally bask in the comfort and affection they'd held on to through the storm's upheaval and the shelter's solitude. Dr. Clara swung by when she could, her spirit lifting each time she saw the trio together. Max, Lucy, and Mrs. Carter, with Emily nearby. Max and Lucy were more than strays. They'd been companions, survivors, and keepers of memory. And now they were home. In the end, it wasn't just their resilience or devotion that had pulled them through. It was the love they held for each other, the tie that had weathered every trial, every loss, and every shadow of doubt. That connection had preserved them, and it would sustain them through the days still ahead. And as Dr. Clara watched them resting side by side on Emily's porch, she felt a quiet certainty. Max and Lucy's journey was far from its close. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel and like this video. We release a brand new episode every day, so hit the notification bell. Also, leave your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next video.